Welcome everyone to our Packers News Camp Chat alongside Jim Ozarski. I am Olivia Reiner. The Packers threw on their shoulder pads and shorts today for their first practice of 8 over the next 9 days. We'll bring you the latest from training camp in just a moment. Before we begin, I want to remind you, as always, can be a part of our conversation. Head on over to Facebook, Periscope, or YouTube. Leave us a comment, leave us a question. Jim and I will address some of those toward the end of our discussion today. Let's start off today by talking about some of the injuries worth noting in practice today. Big news, wide receiver Davante Adams returned to practice today after he sustained an apparent leg injury on Wednesday. How limited did Davante look coming back and acclimating himself in practice today?
He looked like himself. I was participated in one-on-ones, one up against Kevin King, who took over for Jair Alexander, which we'll get to after this. Participated in 11s. Can't really say what that means since we don't know where he is on the depth chart, but he did participate. And look, I think, yesterday, or at least 2 days ago when he was out, was more for sure precautionary, followed by the day off. Look, his whole game, as we found out last year, Olivia, with that toe injury, is, as he said, from the bottom up, from the feet, the ankles, the legs. So he wouldn't have been out there if he couldn't actually go all the way. And we saw that today, that it looked like, he was okay.
Davante Adams returned to practice. However, the other Adams, Montravius Adams, still was sidelined. He did appear on the sideline during practice to observe. He was in a walking boot on his right foot. This has some interesting implications for him. I'm curious to see exactly how this impacts when he'll return to play. He wasn't a player that got to see the field very much last season. He played less than 200 defensive snaps. Jim, how likely is this injury going to impact how often he sees the field come the start of the season?
Yeah, it's really interesting. The boot could have just been precautionary in terms of them allowing him to go onto the grass and get him out of a regular shoe, so it's not kind of compressing the toe injury. Maybe he doesn't have to wear that if he's just in the building, for instance, as opposed to the uneven surfaces. So, if he has to wear the boot, though, as part of the recovery, Olivia, that could really set him back and create an interesting roster issue. Look, cutdowns are in 2 weeks from today as we record this. So where does that leave him at? Not that he's not going to make the team because of it, but it could require some designations or some, unique maneuvering with other people. So, yeah, to see that makes you think it's going to be a little bit before he can even begin to start working back to practice, because once you're stabilized, you don't just take that off and start running around again.
Right. In addition to Adams, but also a few other injuries, a few players who are out today, including cornerback Jair Alexander, offensive lineman Rick Wagner, and outside linebacker Zadarius Smith. Smith has been out now for a couple days. He exited practice early on Wednesday, and Rick Wagner has been out now since Thursday. Jim, how concerned are the Packers with these three players and their injuries?
Well, we'll do the easy one, which Jair Alexander. Honestly, it looked like what you'd call a rest day or an off day. I mean, at least initially he was out in the field early, kind of running around doing some individual workouts. He's a guy who's had some soft tissue stuff, but it didn't look like he was inhibited, at least in some of those things. Zadarius Smith might be trending in the category, Olivia. This is his fourth practice that he hasn't participated in. Now, he's been out on the field and doing, hand fighting with Mike Smith and coaching up guys, which is great, but it still hasn't put on pads or participated. So that is worth monitoring. Rick Wagner also, yes, he was out there watching everyone, probably a good sign, but it's not like he's swinging around that left arm which is what they were looking at when he left practice the other day. So, look, especially Zadarius Smith, Rick Wagner, important guys, or at least in Wagner's case, a guy who you thought could be important. So, definitely going to be worth monitoring this week. As you said, they're going to stick 8 practices in 9 days.
We'll keep an eye on these players and the status of their injuries heading into the next several days of practice. Let's move on to talking about some of the standout defensive players over the last few days of training camp. Jim, we discussed Montravius Adams. With Adams out, that leaves some opportunities for younger, less experienced players farther down in the depth chart to get more opportunities. One of those players is second-year player Kingsley Keke. Keke has stood out so far in his one-on-ones. He won both of his one-on-one pass rushing drills against John Runyon today. Jim, what is it going to take for Keke this upcoming season to make an impact on this defense?
Yeah, I think it's that's obviously, I think the coaches want to see the one-on-one stuff. There's a reason they do it. But I think they're really diving into the run defense elements of their team drills. And is Kingsley Keke moving in the right spots? Is he reading it the right way? And then is he making what they believe would be a play, since they're not going to tackle or hit their own guy? He could pass rush. I think Brian Gutekunst and his staff knew that when they took him late out of Texas A&M a few years ago. It's just he bulked up. I think he said he wanted to add 5-6 pounds when we talked to him in July. And so he's seeing the strength translate in the one-on-ones. For him to play more, it's going to be, is it translating to run defense and being where he's supposed to be, recognizing formations. He said he started to get that a little bit at the end of last year. We can believe him because they played him more over Montravius Adams, for instance. I think now it's just up to the coaches to say, okay, they're seeing that in film when they break these practices down.
It's not only Kingsley Keke among some of the younger players that's standing out early in practice here in training camp. Another standout is 2020 draft pick inside linebacker Kamal Martin. Martin has been getting some more opportunities out on the playing field during 11-on-11s. How likely is it that he'll be able to make a strong case for himself on this team?
Yeah, I don't know what it means depth chart-wise that he's playing next to Christian Kirksey, but I would presume it's a good thing and that he's earned that right to be next to the veteran. So, yeah, I think they're giving him, a shot. Kirk Olivedati told us, his position coach said, look, with no games, which is really where these young inside linebackers would show. Ty Summers, I think, made last year's team because of the preseason games. Olivedati said these young guys like Kamal Martin, like Ty Summers, it's about, okay, do you flash? Do you make the play, whatever they deem that to be, in that rep? Okay, then now you get another one. So I think the fact that Kamal Martin is playing a little more with Kirksey or in front of or behind a Kenny Clark, for instance, that's a positive sign for him going forward.
Those are valuable reps, no preseason games. They need as many live sort of experiences as they can here early on in training camp if they want to have any shot of making the 53 or the 16-man practice squad. Let's move on to some of our questions over on Facebook, Periscope, and YouTube. If you haven't asked a question yet, get it in now. We'll start looking at some of those now. Let's go with Michael. Michael asks, how has rookie quarterback Jordan Love looked so far? Yesterday, you weren't with us, Jim, however. I believe, who was yesterday? Ryan was with me. We had a discussion about how rookie quarterback Jordan Love fared in the 2-minute drill. This was 2 days ago. Yesterday was an off day. Love was able, the premise was to get within field goal range in the final 2 minutes. The offense was only down by 2 points. He was able to do that despite taking a sack at one point on the drive. Altogether, how has Jordan Love looked early in practice?
He looks like a rookie, so for as much of a positive as that drill was, today's practice, not so good. Fumbled a snap, I think threw an interception in coverage, his first kind of turnovers of the day, and that obviously bogs things down. And, that's about being a quarterback. He's been almost intercepted a handful of times now, so it probably wasn't surprising that eventually happened. No, he looks like a rookie who's swimming mentally a little bit. You know, and he even said it's a lot to take in and to try to process all that virtual stuff to the field now here in August. So, I mean, obviously you see the smooth throwing motion. You see him be able to move and get out of the pocket effortlessly. All the toolsy stuff that makes him a first-round pick. But in terms of the other stuff, I think looks every bit like a rookie.
No rookie camp, no preseason games for Love or for any of the rookies. Certainly going to be a more challenging off-season training camp going into the regular season for these younger, less experienced players. Let's move over to Eric. Speaking of no preseason games, will there be more injuries because of no preseason games? The reasoning from the NFL Players Association side to cut back on those 4 preseason games was to eliminate some of those injuries and to not throw players into the fire so quickly without having a substantial acclimation period. The Packers and the other NFL teams were able to implement those ramp-up periods before hitting the practice field. Now they've gotten into this phase. How will the lack of preseason games, Jim, impact the physical health of some of these players?
Yeah, you know, obviously we talked about what they're dealing with already. You know, you figured there will be less just because it's you don't have the contact and the weird bending of limbs and joints because you're not tackling to the ground yet. So we'll see when and if the Packers implement that, how physical or damaging that could be. But look, the injuries we've already talked about, I mean, that's just the flow of practice. I mean, you hate to say a toe or an elbow or whatever's going on with Zadarius Smith or if someone pulls a hamstring. Like, I mean, we were here this time last year talking about similar type of deals. So, you know, it will limit injuries because you're not playing the game. Simple as that. It's 100% injury risk whenever you play football at full speed and tackle to the ground. They're not doing it, so at least for now, I think what we can't say, Olivia, is the ramp-up period and extending that by the Packers has paid off. And what I mean by that is, you know, we haven't seen the hamstrings, the groins, the quads, the calves, the pulls and strains that would knock a guy out. That didn't happen as soon as they hit the field. So this ramp-up period, Chris Gizzi, their strength staff, had to have done a really good job, I think. Because now I think if you tweak a hamstring, to me, it's not because of the off-season. I think that's because now you're into it and something just happened.
Going forward,
my opinion.
Yeah, well, going forward, it'll be interesting to see what the outlook is for preseasons in the future if, because of the way that everything has gone this offseason, if they are successful in getting into the regular season, getting going, if preseason will soon be a tale of the past going forward. Something to keep an eye on. Let's move into Jason's question. Jason asks, how are cornerback Josh Jackson and safety Will Redmond doing so far in training camp? Both have had more opportunities as of late, especially for seeing as cornerback Jair Alexander was out today. Safety Adrian Amos was still out due to a personal reason, an excused absence for Adrian Amos. That's more opportunity for players like Josh Jackson and Will Redmond. How have they been capitalizing on those opportunities in practice?
Yeah, I think Redmond had some issues today in coverage. I mean, some of his one-on-ones and some team stuff. You know, he was let's just say, in the vicinity. Not always his fault. I mean, that's the thing. But the one-on-ones, obviously, that's, you know, he wants to win that stuff. And same thing with Josh Jackson. You know, Jackson, it's interesting. You know, Packers fans are kind of waiting. You know, he was a high draft pick that has been surpassed in a lot of ways by a handful of different players. And ups and downs. I mean, they picked on him early. First few days of camp, he was on the wrong end of some big plays. He's come back once the pads have come on. He's a bigger, more physical kind of guy. So the pads has played into that. You know, so he's evened out a little bit. I think though, you know, look, Redmond, you know, neither of these guys last year started many games, if at all. So I think special teams still matters for these two. And coverage development is still, for Redmond, I think it applies because it's only year 2 of a safety position, Olivia. Jackson, I don't know. There's a part of me that thinks like the coaches want to see him make plays because he's at a point where maybe he should be more often. And so I think we'll find out more in these next few days to see how the coaches graded out today's film. And that'll tell us if they thought he really kind of made a step the last couple days.
Head coach Matt LaFleur said, especially for Josh Jackson, however, this relates to everyone, that he needs to continue to stack practices, have consecutive good practices. And that kind of leads us into our next question here. Michael asks, any of the new wide receivers making impact plays for the roster, making impact and a play for the roster? Not a new wide receiver, however, it was acknowledged today that Marquez Valdes-Scantling had yet another good practice by head coach Matt LaFleur. However, not just Valdes-Scantling, who else, especially among that wide receiving core, has stood out so far in camp?
Yeah, these 2 practices for Valdes-Scantling are probably the first that you could say a receiver has looked pretty good. Which is, the one-on-ones have been inconsistent at best. Jay Kumaro had a great rep against Kevin King on a nice back shoulder throw, clean route. But I haven't really seen too much in the teams. They're kind of doing what they do. They're available. And Matt LaFleur basically said, look, we want to see consistency. Well, I asked what that meant, and he was like, well, it's run game, it's route, running the right route, so the quarterback, so it's kind of these fine-tuned things that really only the coaches can determine in film review. For us, we haven't seen, like, if the fans were here, maybe they'd call different plays if the fans were here, but right now, have you seen a great splash play from a receiver or great, so you're seeing some plays, but they're not like, wow, that's the guy, that's the next guy.
It seemed like Darius Shepard and Jordan Love inside of Lambeau Field the other day had a connection. He was utilized. Love threw to him twice on that 2-minute drill, and one of the gains was pretty big. I think on one of the receptions, it looked like maybe Shepard caught it out of bounds.
Yeah.
It was hard to tell from where I was standing, and I know LaFleur said that he wasn't entirely sure either, that he'd have to go back and look. However, again, it has been few and far between from these receivers.
Yeah, they're guys who, again, they know, like Packers fans and us, we've seen every one of these receivers other than Reggie Begelton and Malik Turner. And those 2 guys are out there. They're professional receivers, but they haven't really done anything to leapfrog. I do want to say Malik Taylor, different receiver, practice squad last year. We have seen him make plays in terms of being open and available where he actually receives the ball in the progression. So in terms of guys trying to battle for a roster spot or stay on a practice squad, I think Malik Taylor, we've seen number 86.
Not to be confused with Malik Turner.
Right.
Don't worry, I absolutely already have gotten them confused. Yeah. Let's move on to Jason here. Jason asks, is Robert Tonyan still part of what they're implementing on offense? We've seen Tonyan get a lot of opportunities during 11-on-11, just getting implemented, not necessarily as just a receiver, but also as a willing blocker as well. What are the Packers' plans for Robert Tonyan heading into his 3rd year with the Packers?
Yeah, it's, I hesitate to, obviously, I don't think we're allowed to really say who's going to be where on the depth chart, but Tonyan, Sternberger, Josiah DeGuara, they're kind of similar guys, so we've seen them do similar things. So in answer to your question, I think they want one of them to stand out or to do some things on a more consistent basis that allows them to play more. I think right now, Robert Tonyan has all the physical traits. It's just a matter of, can he consistently do it and stay healthy while doing so? And unfortunately, again, preseason, for as much as we knock it, those are the games for these guys, the questions you're asking, which are great. it's hard to say because in practices there's everyone else that they're working in, so it's a rep here, a rep there, and honestly, our vantage point, it's hard to see. Did he do that right seal block on the backside of a draw? Like, we just can't. It's just not the same for us. So it's just much harder to tell right now if those guys like a Tanya and Sternberger, DeGuara are really fine-tuning it to at least the way the coaches want to see it.
Mm-hmm. It's a different evaluation period for
right.
us, for the coaches as well. And related to Tanyan, Lindsay wants to know, does Jay Sternberger look like an impactful tight end? Sternberger was out for a little bit. He was on COVID-19 reserve. He's now getting acclimated back into practice, getting mixed in a little bit more on 11-on-11s. How does he look getting back into real action for the first time since, it's been a few days now?
Yeah, I think today's practice showed he's probably, at least to me, getting his football legs back a little bit. I mean, look, when you're on the COVID list, you have to stay away. So he missed. We were just talking about the ramp-up period, Olivia. He missed, 10 days? I mean,
just
most of it.
Probably more.
Yeah. So he had a great block today, which, I think he proved he could do that last year. He's flashed in his route running. He did drop a ball on a great route, actually. Beat a double team. Tim Boyle threw a perfect ball. Would have been a touchdown, but he dropped it. He's had some success in the one-on-one. So, yeah, you're seeing the flashes. I think for a guy who got hurt this time last year, the COVID thing set him back a little bit. I'm curious, Olivia, to see now after the day off, after a week, going forward here, is he going to play a little more? And if so, does he flash a little more?
Mm-hmm. We'll keep you posted and let you know more exactly how many opportunities he's getting as we continue through the next 8 days or so.
Yeah.
8 or 9 days. They're going to be pretty busy. Their only off day over this stretch of 9 days is on Wednesday. That means we will be live after practice every single day to break down camp, let you know who's performing well right outside of Raynitzky or back inside of Lambeau. The Packers will be back practicing on Lambeau Field a couple times this week as well. Make sure you're checking out PackersNews.com for all of your Packers coverage. Make sure you're also following us on all of our social media platforms. We have lots of updates over there throughout camp as well. For Jim, I'm Olivia. We'll see you next time.